Welcome to Introduction to Zine Making, offered by the Northern Arizona University Klein Library. My name is Chris Holthe. I am the Experiential Learning Librarian at Klein Library, and I'll be your guide through this quick session. By the end of this video, you should be able to define zines as a medium for self-expression, as well as compare zines to other forms of media. You'll also be able to identify zines in their historical context, and you'll be given an opportunity to analyze a zine from the library's collection. Finally, we'll learn how to reproduce a common zine format and give you some opportunity to create a short me-zine as a practice activity.
I would say that a zine is a self-published mini magazine.
They're usually handmade photocopies, works of art, really.
I like the total creative freedom that zines embody, and I also like that they're often a medium for alternative voices.
So you'll see like fanzines or review zines that review maybe like girl punk bands that are performing, or there could be like political zines or activist zines.
Zines are fun and good to collect and a cheap way to sort of get yourself out there.
Hearing about the process, hearing about how much work goes into it makes it something extraordinary.
There's something about the tangibility of print that I think I romanticize a lot.
People always say, oh, print is dying, but I really don't believe that.
Down the road, 10, 20, 50 years, do you think that zines are still going to be around?
I think it will be.
Zines, short for fanzines, are often defined as a self-published or independent pamphlet primarily used as a means of self-expression. You can sort of consider zines the precursor to the online personal blog or vlog. Now, these zines are often low budget, meaning they include handwritten text, art, images, and cutouts, and usually have a typical print run of around 10 to 5,000 copies. Now, because of this, zines are almost always for nonprofit publication. In this activity, we are going to discuss how zines compare to other forms of media as a means of self-expression. To start, first think about a topic that you are passionate about. This could be something social, cultural, political, scientific, artistic, or even personal. Now that you have your topic in mind, think about what forms of media you might use to share your thoughts about your topic with others. There are all sorts of forms of media you might use to promote your topic, starting with social media, on apps such as Twitter or Instagram. You can also express your opinions on blogs, vlogs, and podcasts, or even use traditional print media like books, journals, newspapers, or magazines. Some might go for TV and radio, or even produce documentaries about their topics. And of course, you can always go for direct political action through social groups, boycotts, protests, marches, or sit-ins. However, all these traditional forms of media have certain limitations to them, particularly if you don't have access to the necessary resources for these forms of media. You might not have access to the proper technology or publishing services, and this of course disproportionately affects the underprivileged, the disabled, the homeless, or those who live in remote areas or oppressed countries. Many of these forms of media also have corporate-controlled platforms, in which you have to compete with the business interests of those corporations, like the profit generation elements or the influence of ads. There might also be pressure to conform to the platform. Could you really create meaningful poetry on Twitter, for example? Each of these have content rules, balancing censorship and freedom of expression, and often have editors that use standardized language and that force those standardizations upon the users. Many of these forms of media often create it more difficult to reach a broad audience. There's social media bubbles, and it's often difficult to compete with alternative voices. Social media and print media are often less intimate and less personal. And of course, many of these platforms have an element of toxicity about them. Personal attacks and bullying are very common in social media. Misinformation is common. And of course, these formats are not always anonymous. So with all of these negative impacts of traditional forms of media in mind, what might be some benefits of expressing yourself via zines over these other forms of media? One of the key benefits of zines are that the authors of the zines control the design and distribution of their content. There are no set guidelines for publication, and the design and format of zines are extremely flexible. Zines also allow authors to challenge traditional authority. They're not beholden to publishers or digital platforms and have full control over their content. Because of this, zines are often able to address niche or radical topics that promotes relationships with like-minded people. Historians often point to Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine in 1776, as one of the first historical examples of a zine. This 70-page pamphlet was written during the early years of the American Revolution and set forth the author's arguments in favor of American independence. Now, Thomas Paine, being a bankrupt and regularly out-of-work Englishman living in the colonies, was forced to write anonymously for fear of reprisals from the British soldiers and their loyalist allies. As such, the first print run of Common Sense was only 1,000 copies. However, thanks to its very plain language, Common Sense became extremely popular and influential throughout the colonies, and it served to galvanize reluctant colonists to commit to the War of Independence. The idea of the modern fanzine first took shape with the publication of The Comet, beginning in 1930. The Comet was a first-of-its-kind science fiction fanzine published in May 1930 by the Science Correspondence Club of Chicago, Illinois. Importantly, fan contributions were critical in the publication of The Comet, and fans of science fiction would regularly submit art, reviews, radio episode guides, articles, and more for publication. This is also where we begin to see the development of the typical zine style and format. Throughout recent history, zines have regularly been used as an outlet for oppressed or underrepresented groups. A great example of this is a letter from Birmingham jail, written on April 16, 1963, by Martin Luther King, Jr. In April of 1963, MLK was arrested for leading a march through Birmingham, Alabama's business district and was put in jail. King wrote this letter in response. The first part of this letter was written on the margins of a newspaper, which was the only paper available to MLK, with later portions being written on bits of paper smuggled into him. The letter was then given to King's lawyers, who took them back to their movement headquarters. In the letter, King says that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and to take direct action rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. This letter was eventually put up for publishing in the New York Times Magazine, but was denied, and was eventually published as a letter from Birmingham jail in the June editions of Liberation, The Christian Century, and The New Leader. However, the quintessential example of the modern zine being used to combat social injustice and promote radical politics is the Riot Girls zine series, published beginning in the 1990s. Riot Girl was an underground feminist movement that began in the Pacific Northwest in the early 90s. The women of this movement decided they wanted to start a girl riot against a society they felt offered no validation of women's experiences. Riot Girl activism was closely tied to punk music and a DIY aesthetic and involved meetings, the creation of zines, and a nationwide network of support for women in music. Riot Girl zines were defiantly homemade, using cut and paste, collages, and Xerox machines, and often addressed issues such as rape, domestic abuse, sexuality, racism, patriarchy, classicism, anarchism, and empowerment. Editors were collectively engaged in forms of writing and writing instruction that challenged both dominant notions of the author as the individual, bodiless space, and notions of feminism as primarily an adult political project. In this activity, you will be asked to analyze a zine of your choice and to think about how its content and style serve the goals of the author. To begin, please visit the MakerLab tutorial page at libraryguides.nau.edu/themakerlab to select a zine from our online collections. To begin this activity, first visit the MakerLab tutorial page at the link below. From the left-hand menu, find the Zine Making section, and move to our online zine collections page. This page will give you a series of online zine collections with different topics and different collections of zines. Now that you've selected your zine, take some time to read through it and think about the following questions. First, what is your zine about? Describe the style of your zine. Why might the author have decided to make a zine instead of using another form of media? And finally, do you think your zine is more effective or less effective than other forms of media? Now it's time to start making your zine. The first step is to collect the materials you'll use in the creation of your zine. Now keep in mind, zines are usually made with cheap, easily accessible materials like standard printer paper, drawing tools like pencils, markers, and crayons, glue sticks, scissors, and magazines for cutting out images and creating collages. There are a few standard formats of zines, but these come in 4 main sizes based on the standard printer paper sizes. The largest size is an 8.5 by 11 inch folded zine made from standard 11 by 17 inch pieces of paper. The one you see being made here is a standard 5.5 inch by 8.5 inch zine, which again is a folded 11 by 8.5 inch piece of paper. The smallest format of zine comes in at 2.75 inches by 4.25 inches and is a single piece of paper folded in 8 ways. No matter what size you use, keep in mind that zines will always have a multiple of 4 pages based on folding. The content of your zine can be whatever you like, but typically zines include hand-drawn artwork, like illustrations, text graphics, and even poetry. Keep in mind that when drawing, make sure to use thick lines so they will appear during reproduction. If you need help creating your zine or would like to see some tutorial videos, visit the MakerLab page at libraryguides.nau.edu/themakerlab. When it comes time to assemble your zine, be very aware of page order, and make sure your pages are folded and organized correctly. The most typical way of assembling a zine and binding it together is using a method called saddle stitching. You can see this here in the image, where 2 staples are stapled at the very corners of the folds of the page, with the staple focused inwards to create a nice, clear seam. The library's MakerLab has large format staplers that are perfect for creating zines. If you intend to create the content of your zine using a word processor like Microsoft Word or Adobe InDesign, there are a few important settings you'll need to know. First of all, in Microsoft Word, there is an option to print your paper in the exact format you'd want for a zine. To do this, go out to the Layout menu at the top of your Word ribbon and select the extra option for Page Setup. All you'll need to do is in the Pages section of this menu, switch to Bookfold. This will automatically format the Microsoft Word document so that 2 pages will be printed on a single 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. This is perfect for your zine. The next step is to ensure that the paper is printed on both sides, so you don't have to glue pieces of paper together. To do this, when it is time to print your zine, go up to File and Print. In the print settings on the side, make sure that you print on both sides, flipping along the short edge. This will make sure that all of your pages are facing the correct direction when they are printed. In this final activity, you will be creating a short 8-page me zine telling the class about yourself. Your goals are to do the following 5 things. First, create a colorful front and back cover on pages 1 and 8. On pages 2 and 3, tell us about yourself and your hobbies. Pages 4 and 5, tell us where you're from. And on pages 6 and 7, tell us about your major and your career goals. Be sure to include a lot of illustrations and handmade elements. Do you need more help getting started on your zine project? Visit the MakerLab tutorial page at libraryguides.nau.edu/themakerlab to learn more about zine making resources at the Klein Library, view tutorial videos, browse the library zine collection, or explore a selection of online zine sites. You can also schedule a one-on-one project consultation for help with your assignment.